this could be the major roadblock as to why you get very few downloads. And I know a lot of our pod pals out there are listening in and they're like, you know, crying in their cereal because they've got, 12 people listening in, or like my mom doesn't even listen, or, like it's just, it can be pretty brutal out there. And a simple switch that we can flip is the SEO switch. And it's like, once we open that gate, it's possible that, the listeners, the ideal listeners come pouring in.
Welcome to Holistic Podcasting. I'm your host and producer, Kristin Chadwick. After being in the podcast industry since 2016, I am determined to inspire you to start, grow, and maintain your podcast through a holistic approach. If you're an entrepreneur, coach, author, or leader, you need a podcast. And friend, I'm here for you as an experienced podcast coach for over 6 years, working with numerous top podcasts and hosts. Your voice needs to be heard and your story needs to be known. Through holistic podcasting, you will learn how to market your business coming from an aligned and centered place and through intentional strategy. Thanks for listening to the show. Here we go. Welcome back, everybody, to Holistic Podcasting. I am your host, Kristin Chadwick. And like I said in the intro, I am so excited to have a longtime podcaster that I have been following, Adam Schaeuble, here with me. He is the host of Podcasting Business School, and just so honored to have you here. So welcome to the show.
All right, Kristin, thank you so much. It's always an honor to share somebody's platform like this. I'm fired up. We've been bouncing some messages back and forth, and I love talking all things podcasting. So let's dig on in.
Yes, absolutely. Well, so I was telling you before the show that I am an avid follower of you, and you sent a message in my inbox. I love every email he starts with, "This has been created at 5:23 a.m.
Right.
It's always like some obscure time early in the morning. And this one email caught my eye of you talking about podcasting and SEO and how important it is. And I just had to have you here because I feel like this is a conversation that isn't very clear. Like there's a lot of conversation about SEO. And when you bring it into podcasting, it gets fuzzy, or not a lot of people talk about it. And I thought, man, this is a conversation that my audience needs to hear because it's so important. So I would love for you to share what you've been learning as far as marrying those two and why it is so important.
Yes. Well, yes. I love this topic. I feel it is so important because this could be the thing. This could be the major roadblock as to why you get very few downloads. And I know a lot of our pod pals out there are listening in and they're like, crying in their cereal because they've got, 12 people listening in, or like my mom doesn't even listen, or, like it's just, it can be pretty brutal out there. And a simple switch that we can flip is the SEO switch. And it's like, once we open that gate, it's possible that, the listeners, the ideal listeners come pouring in, which is super, super awesome. So when it comes to SEO, the first thing that we have to do is, some people don't know what SEO is. It's search engine optimization. And I think we have to even separate it out into, when people think SEO, they think website, they think Google, they think I'm searching on the internet and I come to a website or a platform. And with podcast players, like I really think we should think differently. Like I almost think SEO doesn't apply. It should be like podcast player app optimizations, like PPA, like PAPOW, like that's what we should be thinking. PAPOW, not SEO. So like I really want to be thinking about not necessarily driving people to my website. I want to drive them to my podcast. And the people that I want driving to my podcast are podcast listeners that are on apps like Spotify, like Apple Podcasts, going and entering something in the search bar, going podcasting tips, or, how to eat vegan or how to lose weight or whatever. So we have to think with that filter in mind, what are people entering in the podcast player apps? What words, what phrases, what are they what are my ideal listeners searching for? And am I optimizing for that? And really, when you talk about SEO, there are three like powerhouse zones that directly apply to the podcast player apps. One, the one with the most power is our podcast title, like the name of our show. And this, we'll break into each one of these individually a little bit, but this is the one that is most screwed up by all my pod pals out there. Like when I do my Friday podcast audit episodes, and I've been doing these for a year and a half now, every single Friday, I would say 9 out of 10 times, I'm telling them they need to change the name of their show. And that's the number one thing that's holding back their ideal listeners from finding them. And then it's like, I got to hold their hand a little bit and get them through it. I'm like, listen, I know you love this title, but it's super creative and weird and no one gets the joke besides you. So that's the most power. The second most power is the host, the description in our host. So wherever you host the show, if it's Buzzsprout or Libsyn or wherever, the description in there, the keywords that are in there are really important. And then lastly are the individual episode titles. Like we need to make sure those are SEO optimized as well. Show notes have a little bit, but those are the top three that I really want to focus on. So is that making sense so far, Kristin?
Absolutely.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about my recipe for a podcast title, because again, this is what people are messing up more often than not. We get really creative and our hearts just get set on this weird title that means something to us. But I want two very important things. I want some sort of keyword and I want an identifier so people know who it's for and who it's not for. If we get that nice little recipe in there, the title works. I have a rule when I consult. It's that when you tell me the name of your show, I should instantly know exactly what it is. You need no further explanation. If you have to go into a 5-minute TED talk about what your show is actually about, after you tell me the name of your show, we got to change the name because you got to think somebody is searching on Apple Podcasts and your keywords work. And then the title pops up. It's not by itself. There's like 20 other shows up there that fit that keyword. And if it's like the awesome Kristin show versus, what, like a very specific title, like let's say they're looking for weight loss and your show is called the Awesome Kristin Show. And then there's another show that's called Losing Weight as a Vegan 40+ Female. Okay. Like people are going to know what that show's about. I have no idea what the Awesome Kristin show's about. So I want that keyword that people could be searching for plus the identifier. And the identifier a lot of times are like an age group, male, female, and an interest group, or something that makes them raise their hand and they go, ooh, that's for me. Like my show isn't called All Things Podcasting. It's called Podcasting Business School because I really like to talk about the business of like how to monetize and grow a business via podcasting. So like it's a little bit more specific. I consulted with a client that wanted to do like a general entrepreneurship show. Then he came to me with a title that had his name. It was all about, and I was like, this is too general. So we ended up launching the Vending Machine Entrepreneur Podcast. My buddy Troy has a show about how to make money by owning and operating vending machines. That's a niche. I know. I know exactly what it's about when I read it, and it's going to attract the exact right person. He does consulting and shows other people how to do this. So like, that's the type of title that we need, not something that's just your name or some people just put their name, like the Adam Schaeuble show. Nobody cares, like that's not. I'm not a famous actor or comedian or anything like that. So this is kind of like the tough love talk that I have to have with lots and lots of podcasters. And here's like my saving grace. This is how I always end this part of the chat. I go, listen, I need you to have a very vanilla and direct and kind of uncreative name for your show so that the right people can find it. And then I want you to be ultra creative with all the content that you produce. Let all the creativity out in the content, not in the name of your show, because that will block everything that you're trying to accomplish. And that usually kind of flips the light bulb on. I go, oh, I get it now. Like Actually, the goal of the show is to actually connect with people, and I'm blocking that if I don't have a correctly named show. Does that make sense, Kristin?
That totally makes sense. And I love that you kind of flipped it on its head of get creative inside of your episodes and your actual creating the episodes versus the title and the podcast show title. Okay, so I have a question because I do have some clients that is their name is the show, but their tagline is SEO specific. What about that? Like when you're looking for that podcast player search engine, does that show up as clearly?
Yes. Okay. As long as the tagline is in the title line of the host.
Okay.
So that's like, you don't even want to put it in. Different podcast hosts have different, cells that you can fill in and stuff like that. But I kind of call this an extended title. So let's say I wanted to create the Adam Schaeuble show, but I wanted to kind of SEO up the title a little bit. I could say the Adam Schaeuble show, all things about launching a podcast, or something like that, or like podcasting tips, podcasting tips galore, and just have that extended title but it has to be all in the title line of the show. And like when you're promoting it with your art or whatever, but I still think the show art is important. Like I feel like that, because the SEO just does the first half. It gets people to the dinner table with that search. But like I said, there's lots of other images there. And if your show art pops up and they're like, what the heck is this about? There's just some dude's face. Like, I don't know. It's not going to get clicked on. So for me, to kind of complete this part of the conversation, I love big, thick, chunky, easy to read lettering, no cursive, no scribbly font, because it's on a phone and there's 20 other images and you get this little tiny box. And I want, like, I don't put my big bald face up on there. I have the words go all the way across. I kind of screwed myself with the word podcasting because it's such a long word, and to fit it in that perfect square, it takes up a lot of the space. And then to have business in school, it kind of like, I like shorter words that like I can make it huge and big and thick across there, but I don't put my face on there because I got a giant head and it takes up too much real estate on that image, like, and nobody cares, So, but like I've got some female clients that are in the fitness space, like the 40+ fitness space. And I'm like, you need to put your, like flexing photo on there, or like you working out, like something, because you represent your ideal listeners, and you are the identifying factor. So they see 40+ female weight loss as a vegan podcast or whatever. And then somebody, this female that looks to be 40+ or whatever, that fits the description, that's like, okay, that's that automatic relatability factor. So, but for me, it doesn't make any sense at all to put my face up on there because nobody cares about Adam Schaeuble.
Yeah. Well, and that's just like in alignment with what you're bringing to the table. So having that conversation of, does my face really need to be on there versus the wording very clear and all of that. I love that. Thank you for answering that question, because that was something that I have been mulling over of how do I utilize that well. So thank you. Okay. Yes. So then moving on. So the second thing you said, descriptions, right? So how do we find those keywords to help beef up our description enough to where it gets dinged inside of those podcast searches?
Yes. Okay. And again, to be super, super clear, because I know some people get confused about this, we're talking about the description of your podcast where you host it.
Correct.
What we're not talking about is like the episode notes or the show notes where you describe what's in an episode. We're talking about the whole podcast, how it is described in the host. And so as long as we understand that, we're good to go. Now, in this zone, I usually break it up into two parts. The first part is that general paragraph, all about the show, what you can expect from the show, but we're looking to stuff as many of the keywords in there as possible.
Okay.
And with your question there, Kristin, like as far as finding the keywords, again, it's a little different than traditional SEO.
Okay.
Like if you go on Google and be like hot keywords for blah, 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 that's more like web-based stuff, not necessarily podcast search stuff. So my best search keyword research has been from people that listen to my show. I grill people. If they reach out to me, if you send me a DM and tell me you listen to my show, if you send me an email, tell me you listen to my show, I'm like, how did you find out about it? What player app do you listen on? What did you search for? Like the whole thing.
Okay.
And I just pull as much of that information out as I can, because that is the best stuff. That is gold to me, where now I've got everything so dialed in. If you type in podcasting tips on any podcast player app, I will pop up. Like my image will be there and I got a shot. I'm at the dinner table ready to eat. So for me, that's how I get all my research. So for my show, I'll type in, I'll make sure in that first paragraph, podcast monetization, growing a brand with a podcast, all those things, podcasting tips for blah, blah, blah. So that's where I kind of keyword stuff. And that's the research that we need to put in. And obviously we can use web-based, Google tips and stuff like that. Like that works too. But if you get the opportunity to ask one of your actual listeners, to me, that's way better. That's even better, to where we go, okay, what did you search for? Or let's say you've got clients, or you've got a Facebook group, or you've got an Instagram following. This is a great poll question to go, hey, as you may know, or may not know, my show is this. If you were looking if you're on a podcast player app, if you went to Apple Podcasts and you were looking for a show like what I have, what would you put in? What would you search for? What words would you put in? And just take that, create a little Excel spreadsheet and jam those suckers everywhere you can on your host description. So is that making sense so far?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Eating it up.
So that's the first, that's the first paragraph. All right. Then below that, this is something new that I've been doing. I learned about this on Clubhouse.
Okay.
And it's like one of the top things I've learned on Clubhouse by far. So podcasts, in the second part of the podcast host description, I want you to think about, what would somebody enter into Google? Like if they were looking for content like yours, what questions would they put into Google? So for my show, it's how to make money as a podcaster, how to sell my course as a podcaster, how to increase my clients, my coaching client business, podcasting tips for making money, all those sorts of things.
Yeah.
So I'll challenge all of our listeners to come up with 5 to 10 Google questions that somebody would enter into Google if they were looking for content like yours. And I want you to list those in the second part of your host description.
Okay.
All right. So, and the nice little transition sentence that I put in there from the intro paragraph below that, I put, if you're searching for answers to questions such as Google question, just blast them in there. And like you will start pulling up, like that's where we add the traditional SEO in there, and you're going to start pulling up for these Google questions. Now let's add a little bit of extra fuel to this fire. When we talk about podcast episode titles, all those Google questions, those need to be episode titles as well. Yes. I mean, they're perfect. Totally. Like, what question is your episode answering? Put that as the title, and guess what? When people search that on Google, it's going to pull up. Like individual podcast episodes will now pull up in a Google search. So this is awesome. Yeah. And you add your keywords in there, same thing. And it nothing makes my heart happier than when I have somebody new that I run across. Hey, how'd you find me? So like, I typed in podcasting tips somewhere and you were just all over the place. I'm like, yes.
I know that's how I found you. Was like, come on, give me some podcasting. Like, I think I typed in a podcasting school back in the day. I mean, I really think I started following you around episode 5. So a while ago. Yes. So
nice. Nice.
Yes.
Oh,
so it works.
OG pod pal.
Yes. Just quietly listening.
Yes. And now we're creating content together.
That's right.
But for real, like this really works, and it can be that simple, but we have to again, some people just kind of have that fight the power, I'm going to be creative no matter what. I don't care.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, if you can just give in to these concepts just a little tiny bit, and again, unleash, when you flip on your ATR 2100 or whatever kind of mic you got, and that light goes on, creativity is just unlocked.
Yes.
But all this little just mechanical stuff needs to be put in place so the right people that you can actually impact with your show are finding it. And I started putting these into place with this brand, with Podcasting Business School, and I saw my downloads just skyrocket, like unbelievable. And you fix this once to kind of stay on top of it, update it a little bit here and there, but it's an easy fix. So if we can get that done, you're unlocking the door that leads to, maybe 10xing. I've had clients 100x their downloads just by getting this sorted out. So the SEO is the real deal.
Yes. Oh man. Wow. I just feel like you gave so much value, not only to our listeners, but I feel like I just wrote like a whole page of notes right here of like, yes, 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 yes. Like, oh, it just so makes sense that we can't necessarily have the same rules of how web searches work within podcasting. And that makes it so clear to me. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
It's huge value. I would love to offer you a chance to share where people can find you. You guys go subscribe, number one, to his podcast because it's so good and so valuable. You get stuff like this all the time. And where else can people find you?
Yeah. So Podcasting Business School, everywhere that you look, definitely subscribe to the show. I would love for you to start with episode 281. That's kind of a benchmark episode for me. I talk about the podcasting success timeline. That leads into my podcast, a lot of like business building workshop type episodes. So if you're interested in growing a business or building a business via podcasting, that's a great episode to start with, 281. Podcasting Business School on Instagram. Send me a DM. I will send you a voice DM back and say hello. That's one of my favorite things to do. And then I've got all kinds of freebies. I invite all my pod pals into my pod pal Zoom party once a month. So if you want to come on the show and hang out in a group of like-minded podcasters, you can come on the show, and all that's available at podcastingbusiness.school. That's my website, and come and hang out.
Yes. Take advantage of it, you guys. He really is such a great guy. And continuing to bring so much revelation of just simple. That's what I love about it. It's just so simple. And even going through one of your challenges right now of just like be a human, just heart to heart connection. And I just love that because you really do live that out in your podcast and how you operate and engage with your audience. And I have been a benefactor of that. And I'm hopeful that and know that our listeners here are going to find more and more value with your show as well. So thank you so much, Adam, for coming on the show.
Kristin, I appreciate the invite. I appreciate all those nice things you just said. Wow. That's, but that's why I'm doing this. I'm very motivated because I had a really hard time. I started my first show back in 2015. The first 3 years were really hard and they kind of sucked and I wanted to quit all the time, but I'm just too stubborn. And I really, in my heart of hearts, I believed in this podcasting thing. I'm like, I just have to figure it out and get it in front of the right people. I know I can do this. And at the end of 2019, when I went full time and sold my fitness center and kind of took the plunge, it was a pretty amazing thing. And to now where I only have to work 3 days a week and I can coach all the teams and take my kids to school and do all that, like the leverage of lifestyle. So if there's anybody out there that's got a show and they're thinking about like, I don't know if this is for me, I know the thought of quitting is probably rolled around in a lot of people's heads out there. Don't quit. Like there's a lot of people out there that need to hear your unique message. And there are ways that, you can plug in and listen to people like Kristin and myself, and we can help you get on the right track so that you can get in front of those right people, make an impact and get traction with your show. So Kristin, again, thank you for having me on. I had a blast and I can't wait to continue our pod pal friendship.
Absolutely. You take care. Thanks for listening to Holistic Podcasting. I want you to know that I truly value every listen. To show my appreciation, I offer a one-on-one free podcast consultation call. Whether you're wanting to start a podcast or you're ready to take your podcast to a whole nother level, come sign up. The link is below down in the show notes. Have a great day.